Stephen King's novels are without a doubt some of the most adapted stories of any modern creative, and he also happens to be a massive inspiration for one of the most well-respected and consistent filmmakers working in horror today, Mike Flanagan. There have been many Stephen King stories that I've seen adaptations of without having read the books, and I've quite enjoyed them. It, Christine, Gerald's Game, Misery, so on and so forth. These are all movies that I saw before engaging with the source material. But what I found really interesting was what I realized when I actually started reading Stephen King's books a few years ago. While there are many iconic and well-regarded adaptations of his work, I found that in many cases when I would read the book, I realized that while the stories were being adapted clearly, it seemed that many of these missed the core themes of King's stories, to the point that I had no idea until I properly dove into his work that it's all pretty much entirely driven by theme. My favorite example of this, probably because it's the easiest one to make the point I'm trying to make, was Christine, which John Carpenter did an adaptation of in 1983. It's a solid movie. The novel, well, The Haunted Car is the vehicle for the story, is not so much about the haunted car as it is connection, loneliness, addiction, and the struggles of needing to feel like you're valued by those around you. It's a very emotionally driven story. The Carpenter film is about a haunted car. The themes are still there because of the nature of the story, but they're not explored in the same way that they are in the book. And this is the sort of thing that happened many times for me, including with It, as I mentioned, which is one of the greatest stories I've ever read. And while the movies aren't terrible, they don't capture what makes that book so memorable and emotional. That brings us to Mike Flanagan's 2017 adaptation of Gerald's Game, which is one of the rare examples I found where finally reading the novel did not make me realize that the adaptation missed the point. I'm not sure if this is much of a hot take, but I think that Mike Flanagan is the best at adapting Stephen King stories, maybe ever, with this and Dr. Sleep being examples of that, and I would also say Midnight Mass is the best Salem's Lot adaptation ever, despite not actually being one. Gerald's Game released only a year after Flanagan's first project in his partnership with Netflix, that being Hush, one of the strongest home invasion films I've ever seen, and featured an easy all-timer for a final girl who deserves a hell of a lot more credit than she gets. Mike Flanagan's adaptation of Gerald's Game is an extremely impressive film, not only because it effectively translated the thematic core of the story that King was telling, but also because Flanagan managed to make certain changes that more closely fit his vision of the story without losing a sense of being faithful, which is something that's very hard to do. Gerald's Game is a fantastic novel, and the 2017 film is a very rare case of being just as good as the source material, and I've been wanting to talk about it for ages, so let's take a closer look at this emotional, disturbing, powerful tale of overcoming lifelong binds. Just before that though, one really important thing in a situation like this is having a strong cell phone reception. A quick voice prompt to call 911 and Jessie would have been saved in no time, but only if she can actually rely on her service provider, which is why today's video is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Something that has really bothered me about phone plans since I started working from home is that the only options tend to have a ridiculous amount of data that I will never come close to even using a quarter of, so I wind up paying for a ton of data that I never use. Mint lets you choose the data amount that works for you, so you don't have to work with a one-size-fits-all plan with options of 5, 15, or 20 gigabytes, as well as an option for unlimited data if you do need a lot. All their plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, plus free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK, and what's great is how simple it is to switch over and get the best deal for you. You can do the entire process online and be set up literally in minutes by using an eSIM, and what's really cool is that Mint allows you to buy your cell service in bulk, with 3, 6, and 12-month packages offered, each of which saves you more money. All their plans also come with an unconditional 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can try the service out even if you're unsure and not have to worry. Using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen now, new customers can get their premium wireless plans that start at $15 a month. Thank you again to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this video and helping ease the stress of the gargantuan Nosferatu video I'm currently working on. Now, back to Gerald's Game.
You stalked us.
Yeah, enough for the whole weekend.
The film opens with Jesse and Gerald, a married couple who are going to stay at a lake house rental cabin for a little while, hoping to rekindle the flame of their relationship that seems to have been fading away. Not that it was ever ideal, as we'll get more into later. One of the things that makes adapting a novel into a film an interesting challenge is that you don't generally have the same constant access to the thoughts of the characters, meaning that things like backstory can take a little more work in figuring out how to portray. In the novel, there is a lot that we learn about Jessie's life and the struggles that she's had with her relationships to men, rooting from her father, and one event in particular that happened when she was a kid. We learn about some of this in the film, but even though we don't have quite as much backstory, Flanagan did a fantastic job of establishing the tension between them and some of the issues they're facing right from the opening moments, while also making you really uncomfortable. We see the two packing for the trip, and the last item that's packed away is a set of handcuffs, which gives a pretty good idea of what the point of this trip is. The tension during the opening moment of the car ride where Gerald starts feeling up Jessie only to have her move his hand establishes a really uncomfortable dynamic, and it makes what we just saw being packed feel very off-putting, especially when you consider that it was the last thing he packed so that it would be sitting on top of everything else, which gives this sense of his priorities. So when we get this little moment, it's just, oh, it's not good. The opening section is designed to illustrate the dynamic between Jesse and Gerald at this point in their relationship, and the way that this is portrayed does such a perfect job of this, and also instantly makes you care deeply for Jesse as a character. First off, with her taking his hand and kissing it, which perfectly sums up exactly what's going on here. Gerald sees this almost entirely as a place for them to go and play out his wildest sexual fantasies, but Jesse genuinely is hoping that this trip will help them get back to a point where they had a deeper connection. To be fair, from the way they talk a little later on, it does seem like the idea for this trip came from Gerald floating that they get some time away to experiment with things a little bit and see if it can help to reconnect them, because they've not been having a very fulfilling relationship or sex life. On top of that little attempt in the car, another thing that I really appreciated was the first thing that each of them did upon arriving, where Jesse went and stood by the water to look out over the ocean, and Gerald went inside to take Viagra. Now, I don't want to make it sound like there's nothing good here. In fact, some of their interactions through this opening section are really sweet, but that serves to make things more tragic later on. You can feel the history between them. Despite where they may be at the moment, they got together and married for a reason, and in this moment, where they're thinking that they may have a chance at getting back some of that early flame, you can see both of them feeling more connected and open with each other than they've probably been in a long while. Where this all collapses is in the specific reason that they're both in a relatively good mood. For the most part, Jesse is humoring Gerald with this trip, willing to try out some of his suggestions, but not really being on board with the whole idea for herself, which is directly tied into something that we learn about later and something that's been trapped by her for her whole life. So we can touch more on it later on, because Gerald is exploiting her nature to a degree. He's in a good mood for a very different reason. It's not so much the hope of what this will change in their dynamic, it's that he feels he's finally going to get free rein to indulge in a side of himself that he's been itching to. There's more that we can talk about with this opening, but it's important to get the context of where things go and touch on what happened to Jessie when she was a kid, since that's so core to her dynamic with Gerald and why she ended up with him in the first place. The catalytic event in Gerald's game is, well, Gerald's game. Once they get settled into the place, their first order of business is to get started on the first thing that set them on this trip, and Gerald brings out the handcuffs. I do feel the need to mention here, before we get too far into the film, this story deals with some extremely uncomfortable subject matter with, SA, abuse, manipulation, coercion. It's rough, so just wanted to give a heads up in case that's something you'd rather avoid. It's very clear from the moment this starts that Jessie is not comfortable with what's happening, but she's going along with it because she wants to please Gerald. She doesn't seem like she can settle into it, and her anxiety gets highlighted further when she expressed shock in what Gerald has chosen to use here.
Gotta say, I was expecting No more novelty things like with velvet or silk or something.
This is where a side to Gerald that has peeked through once before comes out in full force in what is undoubtedly one of the most uncomfortable sequences in a movie that I have sat through. Thanks to the YouTube guidelines, I do have to be rather delicate about how I word some of this, and there's a lot of it I don't even think I can show, which, trust me, bothers me more than it probably does you, because I don't like cleaning up language when talking about things that aren't clean. And this certainly isn't. Gerald seems to have, I guess, a fantasy in which consent is not present. And it's really tough to watch this play out. Again, I'm not even sure how much I can show because Jesse genuinely does tell him to stop, and I'm pretty confident there are some rules around that. It is a really uncomfortable scene for a multitude of reasons, with Jesse seeming very apprehensive and unsure, Gerald being rather creepy, and then as it escalates with her actually telling him to stop, and he takes that as her playing into the fantasy, which just makes him push more. It's not good. She winds up needing to kick him to send a more clear message, and it's here where any of the sweet husband facade that may have been faintly there upon their arrival fades away and his true colors show through. It's not only a really tough scene to get through because of how uncomfortable it is, but there's also this really painful sense of regret and sadness that comes through from both of them, where they don't know where they went wrong. That being said, the spin that Gerald takes on this pretty much wipes away any sort of sympathy you could have for him as he starts blaming Jesse for getting upset about what he's doing and acting like she's the one in the wrong here. On top of how horrific it is to see him play out this fantasy, not listen to her when she tells him to stop, and then blame her for getting upset, she's the one trying to smooth it over and make him feel better when he gets upset. Credit to her, she does lay down her feelings here and isn't just like, yeah, go ahead, never mind. But she does try to ease his worry, which is directly tied to her trauma. As if it wasn't already bad enough, Gerald seems to become completely delirious and he goes back to what he was doing. I'm sure in his head he's justifying this by treating it all like it's still part of a fantasy, but it's so clearly fucking not, and the fact that she actually can't do anything about it is just harrowing. She bites his lip this time, to which he responds in a way that shows just how far gone he is and how little he actually values her.
The fuck is the matter with you?
What's important to set up here is that because of what happened when she was young, Jesse married someone who may not have been the best person, but as she says, he was comforting. He's older than her, he's a lawyer who makes good money. There's a sense of security there, and it's so clear that he's used to getting what he wants. So much so that he's still blaming her for getting mad when he's literally, I can't even say the word on YouTube. He's not taking no for an answer. Are you happy, YouTube guidelines? This is where it all falls apart, with Gerald first rubbing his chest and stretching his arm out, and in just a moment's time, after some confused rambling, the heart attack takes him out. The sense of panic that is managed here is crazy, and I think now is a good time to talk about our Lord and Savior, Carla Gugino, who's a Flanagan regular for a damn good reason. Her performance in this film is stunning, and because it's a movie that takes place almost entirely in one location, performance matters a lot. It's an extremely demanding role that I can imagine was emotionally exhausting because of how intense it constantly is, with her needing to play panic and dread and horror and trauma and denial of reality almost constantly. Jesse is in a nightmare situation here, and this first section after Gerald's heart attack is largely as impactful as it is because of the sense of genuine panic that Gugino is able to bring to the character.
Wake up! Wake up!
The initial realization of what may have just happened to Gerald, then remembering that she literally can't move and the only person who could have uncuffed her is unresponsive, horrifying. Something that Flanagan is very good at is showing realistic images of human health issues and injuries. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to anyone other than my weird brain, but there's a way that he goes about these moments that feels uniquely unsettling, and one of those moments is right here when Jesse props Gerald up on her foot, and I don't know, like there's something too realistic about the way he looks here. Her crying and begging him to get up, just suffocated by the situation and battling with a mind that's denying what she knows well to be true. The delirious moment of her yelling for help and then laughing because of something Gerald said earlier.
Try to go for help.
Really?
Yeah, I'm just trying.
It sound more real now, huh?
That moment is amazing because it's like her mind spotted one source of something that wasn't terrifying and decided that it could try and force reality to shift if it just latched on to that one little bit of something resembling a joke. Like, this is terrifying, but that's sort of funny, so obviously things are gonna work out now, so Gerald, it's time to get up. It's harrowing. The blood pooling is what really sends her over the edge, and I love how that moment transitions into these exterior shots of the house, which then fade to show the passage of time. Her screams become nearly silent only just outside the house, and having that come right after the confirmation that no, Gerald is not getting up, it's the perfect way to end the sequence and get the audience invested in the nightmare that Jesse is now living through. One of the things that I really love about this story is how it deals with the stream of consciousness. While she's here, she begins to hallucinate a manifestation of herself and Gerald, and sometimes her father as well, and there are all these great little moments where you can tell her subconscious is latching on to something that hasn't yet made it to the front of her mind, like how she remembers Gerald's colorful joke not long after things go bad.
And what is a woman, anyway?
A life support system for a...
Yeah, that was it.
It seems like a random thought while Gerald's disgusting behavior is right in her head, but the reason this occurred to her is because her subconscious is realizing that her body is basically on life support right now. The only resources she has are whatever was stocked up in her body before those cuffs were locked, and now she's just running out the clock. That kind of thing happens a lot, where she'll think of something that seems unrelated before making the connection that there is a proper reason why it occurred in the moment when it did. One other thing I wanted to mention was how much weight they're able to pull out of simple phrases in the movie. There's something they managed to capture in the gravity of certain ideas that come to mind when facing death like this, with her worrying about being found in a horrific state after dying and rotting there for God knows how long, and the idea presented with her dying with a look of terror because of the moonlight man tickles my brain so much.
It's because what you saw at the end, coming out of the dark.
The way they say,
Just to say the lady died hard. You only need to look at her to see that.
there's just something so heavy about that. All right, we're gonna talk about the thing that happened to Jesse as a kid so that we can properly dive into how that event weaves its way through every part of the story and the symbolism. Again, it's not nice. When Jessie was a child, her family went out to a lake house to watch a total eclipse, something that only happens in a given location once every 375 years. She decided that she didn't want to go out on the boat with the rest of her family, and so her father said that he'd stay back with her while the others went out. A couple things that are worth mentioning here. One, her mother already seems very frustrated with her and the fact that her father has an easier time with her than she does, referring to her as a daddy's girl.
It is not going to kill her to spend some time with the rest of us. Just a complete daddy's girl.
That's normal, isn't it?
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, not dissimilar from how it felt when Jessie and Gerald first arrived at their place, her father appears to be a rather warm person.
Oh, you did it!
Like finish zone. Yeah, I'm hit this too.
All right.
He's sympathetic to Jessie, doesn't want the mum angry with her. He seems like a kind person, which makes the way things play out even worse. Now, once again, we are dealing with some extremely delicate subject matter here, so I'm gonna have to sanitize my wording. During the eclipse, Tom begins to poke and prod about how Jessie used to sit on his lap. Trust me, I'm already uncomfortable too. As we see here, he's a very manipulative person, as he tries to exploit his daughter's giving nature.
Nah, that's stupid.
What?
I was gonna say, well, how about it? For old time's sake.
There are these little details that scream that Tom is a bad dude, like with this comment.
That's a beautiful dress. Is that your new one?
Yeah. Mom said it was too short.
Mom's wrong. You look amazing.
Or the fact that he seems to have conveniently forgotten his eclipse glasses inside, so now they only have one pair and have to get close to share. I'm not gonna show this, but while she watches the eclipse, he does something else. I think that should make it clear enough. They don't show it, of course, but that doesn't make it any less nauseating as a scene. The handcuffs in this story are not just a means to a horrifying situation, they're rich with thematic material, along with some other things like the dog, which we'll talk about in a moment. These are not just cuffing her to a bed, they're the shackles that she's been bound by since this horrific event, and not because of what happened on the lake, but because of what her father did to her afterwards. And despite being nothing more than a conversation, it's equally as difficult to watch as what happened during the eclipse itself. It's this disgusting manipulation of a young child who's terrified by what just happened and what will come of it, especially because her mother is already resenting her, feeling that she has a preference for her father over her. This isn't a scene where Tom sits down and begs Jessie not to tell anyone. It's a scene where he digs into the core of her psyche and plants those handcuffs on her for life by manipulating how vulnerable she is and once again taking advantage of her nature. The entire time, he's sitting there just saying, well, maybe we should tell Mom because it's gonna come out eventually, and then, well, if we don't tell her now, then we can't tell her ever. And he just pushes and pushes on this idea of them telling Sally, which is something he has zero intention of actually doing. He's just dangling a terrifying idea in front of her by forcing her to face the feeling of her mother finding out. If he came in here and said, we can't tell her, she already didn't want to, but them agreeing on it probably wouldn't have led to a strong enough silence from her. So instead, he gets deep down into her mind by acting like they really do need to tell Sally, knowing full well that she will never agree to do that. By approaching it this way, he fully solidified her silence forever, and that's the shackle that has trapped her since this happened, because he made her make the decision instead of telling her what was going to happen. It never really was her decision, though, to not tell her mother, despite Tom presenting it in that way, and so her agency was only ever an illusion being manipulated by those who knew how vulnerable she was. It is a disgusting, haunting scene with the lowest of the low someone can do to another person, and of course, it's his own fucking daughter. Henry Thomas's performance during this scene makes me want to crawl out of my skin, and the scene where she's trying to downplay what he did to her in her own mind is fucking heartbreaking.
He only touched himself. And if you want to blame someone, I might as well blame my mother or the boat. The sundress, it was too short.
There is one really cool thing that I wanted to mention here, which is a connection with another Stephen King story, that being Dolores Claiborne. It was the first Stephen King book I ever read, and there also happens to be an eclipse in this story, which takes place during a very pivotal moment. I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't read the book. I know there is an adaptation. I actually haven't seen that movie, but Dolores does something involving a well during the eclipse, and what's inside of that well is a deeply kept secret.
He had a dream. There was a woman standing over a deep well, looking down into the blackness. She was standing there in her red dress, looking right at me.
That's one of the things I love so much about King's writing. You'll often get these stories that are mostly grounded, but then there are these hints of some strange cosmic thing floating around in the air. And that moment of connection between these two stories is something that I adore, and I'm so glad that Flanagan decided to include it in the film. What's so great about this is that in Dolores Claiborne, she got a flash of what was happening with Jessie while she was stood at the well, and while neither of them knew at that moment what this connection meant, it's extremely potent and really magical, where one is breaking free of her chains while the other is being locked in them, and both are being bound by secrecy in the same moment. It's really great, and if you're aware of both stories, it's a sort of hopeful thing that comes in a moment where each of them have just gone through something life-changing and rather traumatic, where they feel very alone, but it's this flash of like, no, you're not alone, at a time when both are probably feeling quite the opposite. Sorry for the tangent, but I've always loved that connection between these two stories, and it makes me happy to see it here, and I have no idea where else I'd be able to talk about it. So with that context, we can go back and look closer at her relationship with Gerald. She never did tell anyone about what happened, but it's clear that what she experienced made her feel like she wasn't allowed to be in control of things, that she had no actual agency in her life. What her father did broke her ability to live freely, and so she gravitated towards someone who seemed like he could provide comfort and security over anything else. He has money, he's older, which probably made him seem wiser and like she could trust him to keep her secure. But he knew that very well, and he exploited it. There's this constant idea of not having enough that they choose to reflect with this dog, which they saw on their way here. Jesse wanted to help the poor guy, Gerald was closed off to the idea, but wait, what is she doing? Jesse, wait, don't use that, holy shit! Fuck! Sorry. Anyway. While that steak probably tasted like a golden apple off a divine tree, the dog isn't all that big on it. And when Gerald dies, that slowly starts picking away at his body as the film goes on. He started with the long dead meat, which wasn't fresh off the bone, then went to the dead body, but it's only a matter of time before he moves on to Jesse, who's much warmer and fresher and will fight, providing some thrill of the hunt that this dude has been missing. Just like how Tom couldn't be happy with the $200 steak that is Kate Siegel, and so he decided to do something more disgusting. Or like how Gerald wasn't satisfied, so he decided to do something disgusting. That parallel between this feral dog and the men who've mistreated Jessie throughout her life was something that I felt like they handled really well, and it helped to paint a clearer picture. And what makes it even more impactful is that Tom and Gerald are exponentially worse than the dog, which was never aggressive and was only eating to survive. It's a really poignant piece of symbolism to have this dirty looking, matted dog who's eating a corpse and will soon be pointing his snout at our lead's direction, and this little dude is still a more sympathetic character than Tom or Gerald. This becomes even more interesting when you consider that both Tom and Gerald made excuses along the lines of not being able to help what happened, indicating that it was something out of their control, with Tom saying the eclipse made him think strange things, and Gerald posing what happened like it was just part of his natural drive that's not being fulfilled. They're making these sorts of excuses while the dog's behavior actually is just a part of nature. It's there to highlight how full of shit they are. It's eating to survive. It's not evil for eating Gerald, and it wouldn't be evil for it to eat Jesse at the end of the day either. And these two are trying to play off the things they did with a similar angle. It's depressing, it's horrific, and watching as Jessie is forced to face this more clearly than she ever has before, as she faces the very strong potential of her own death, is something that really hits, especially thanks to all of this brilliant symbolism. The sun was blacked out for 2 minutes when she was 12, but in reality, it's been blacked out for her ever since. With that, it's time to talk about the Moonlight Man. This is one change that I actually thought was an improvement on the source material, where in the novel, Jessie's thought process leads to her dubbing this mysterious figure as the Space Cowboy, which is about as Stephen King as you can get. The Moonlight Man is easily my favorite piece of symbolism in the movie, because he does one of my favorite things that any symbolism can, and that's to represent one really potent part of a story before being seen from a different perspective and perfectly reflecting a whole new angle. The first appearance of this thing is with him standing in the corner out of the moon's light and barely visible before being shown a little bit more and returning to the darkness. It's an incredibly unsettling moment, and essentially, for the majority of the story, he is the embodiment of death, a constant reminder of the thing that's coming for Jessie if she's unable to find a way out of this nightmare situation, holding a box of pretty things from those whose time has come. The thing seeps into her nightmares, providing a really damn good jump scare that got me better than most can. I also just love that imagery of him at the bottom of the bed licking her feet, because it's this nasty predatory thing where she's feeling like there's nothing she can do, like she's already been claimed by death. There are some beautifully atmospheric, eerie moments where her psyche is taunting her with what she saw, and there's this great sense of mystery around the character where it's this supernatural angle that gets introduced and you can't be entirely sure whether or not it's real, but then you get these footprints in the blood, and it's like, yeah, please give me more horror that feels like that.
I think it's a footprint. And if it is...
Shut up!
It was death you saw.
We'll talk more about the Moonlight Man at the end, but for now, it's time to get to one of the most nauseating things I've ever watched. So throughout the film, Jessie's state, of course, gets worse and worse. Her hands and feet cramp, her blood's cut off by the cuffs when she falls asleep in them, and the way it's portrayed is really nasty. I love all the little details from early on in the film that you would think wouldn't matter until they come back around and they're incredibly important for Jesse's survival, like Gerald having taken Viagra and placing the water on the shelf above the bed, or the tag for her dress that she brought being something that she can use as a straw, which results in an extremely tense scene where one small slip-up will cost her her whole life. It just gives this sense of purpose to the smallest details in the film, and it makes it feel very pointed at the core of the theme of the story. She fights like hell, but it's really nothing compared to what's coming. With Jesse's backstory slowly being unveiled and used to contextualize her relationship with Gerald, it comes to a head where she has a flashback to the dinner after the eclipse. Jessie found herself staring at her mother's pregnant belly, filled with the thoughts of Tom being the parent to another child, and being both terrified at the idea of what he may do to this one and also furious at the thought that he just gets to continue on living a happy life as a new father. She's so filled with rage and fear that she breaks the glass in her hand, which brings to mind a final idea that could get her out of this whole mess. Having this story, which deals with really heavy subject matter, is a risky task, not only because of how sensitive this stuff is, but also because, at least in my opinion, it means that you really need to be able to send it all home well. And they do. If you don't have a conclusion that feels like it's matching the intensity of this kind of subject matter, it can kind of feel like you're just exploiting it to be disturbing. Thankfully, they avoid that with this sequence. King's writing is often softened up for the adaptations, with Misery being a very good example because of how much more violent the book is, but Flanagan had no interest in cleaning up anything in the story, be it the really horrific backstory or the nauseating but profound way that Jesse escapes from the cuffs. We all know how much this dude likes fucking up hands, and he's too good at it. Mike, stop it! But don't actually, because it's really effective. I'll talk about the narrative significance of this in a second, but first I want to focus on the surface of what's going on here. Part of the reason that this scene was so difficult for me to watch the first time around is because I thought I knew where it was going, and I was completely wrong. Her realization that she can break the glass led me to believe that she would be using her blood as a lubricant to slip out of the cuff, which is partially true, but it's not the whole story. There is just no way I can show this, unfortunately, which it really sucks because it's a wildly impressive thing from a technical standpoint, but to say it in the most delicate way possible, if the skin on her hand was a glove, it's coming off. I had fully prepared myself for the blood as a lubricant technique being the whole thing. So when the first indication that this scene was going way further than that came up, my head started to spin and it only got worse as it went on. Now, mind you, this was many years ago now, but I literally had to stand up and walk around for a second while dizzy and nauseous after seeing this for the first time. Not only are the practical effects in this scene way too good, it's all the other stuff here that really sells the moment. Gugino's haunting performance adds so much to it, and the sound design is about as good as it could have been. There is no music whatsoever, so all you have are the horrific sounds coming from what she's doing and the wails of pain and horror she has while she watches. I have a feeling she may have been better off looking away from it, but that wouldn't have fit the narrative purpose of what's going on here nearly as well. It's moments like this in King's writing that I find make his work so powerful, and it's translated in this adaptation just brilliantly, because this isn't just a scene where this woman is escaping from handcuffs. It's her taking back her agency in life and breaking free from the chains that were locked on her wrists when she was a child and which she'd been pulled around by for her entire life. She has finally faced what her father did to her as she faced the end of her life, with her younger self confronting her in a dream about it and how she's locked away what happened, effectively trapping this young girl in a hellish eclipsed world and carrying on her life as a husk. This dream was the first time she ever let those thoughts come out and saw them. And coming out of it, she decides that she needs to let herself free. Both the her that she's become and the her who was locked away in the darkness for so long. Having something that heavy needs to be reflected in a potent escape. something that you really feel and that hurts. It has to be extreme. It has to make you want to look away. But just like Jessie doesn't turn her eyes from it because she's tired of hiding, the viewer is sort of faced with the same thing, which I really appreciated. While I was watching the scene, I felt like it would be disrespectful of me to look away from what was going on. It's a nasty, horrifying sequence, but it's a really beautiful and powerful one at the same time, where we watch someone brutally tear themselves from their chains, leaving behind injury but still allowing her to leave freely and begin to heal. After finally confronting what happened to her as a child and acknowledging the part of herself that has been trapped in the eclipse for so long, Jessie has one last thing to attend to before leaving, and that's facing death itself and throwing away the last remnant of the binds she was trapped in. In the hallway, the Moonlight Man stands, grinning excitedly and holding out his box of treasures, and instead of cowering away now, Jessie goes straight towards him. She knows that death will not come for her. She will not allow it to, but she will give it her wedding band, acknowledging that a part of her has indeed died and will never come back. Acknowledging trauma for the first time in her life. This is her letting the part of her that was trapped forever go, leaving it behind and nodding her head at death as she passes it by with a confidence and agency she has never felt before. The final section of the movie is where everything finally falls into place, and this is the sort of thing that I think would often be changed in King adaptations, but thankfully Flanagan remained faithful to the novel and allowed the thematic purpose of this to be expressed, despite spending much less time with it than the novel does. Jessie spent her whole life shoving down what happened and refusing to acknowledge it. We see her writing a letter to her younger self using the destroyed hand many months on from the incident.
What got me through those nights was you. Thinking of you. And why you came to me that day.
It's a really beautiful scene where you feel Jessie finally saying, "I see you, and I'm sorry for what happened," and using her experience to help others who've been through similar things.
When I was 12, I went to the lake house with my family.
The best thing about this sequence, though, is how the Moonlight Man comes back into the story, and it's strangely something that I found really disappointing when the movie came out, because I was 16 at the time and didn't really get themes yet. This man, only made of moonlight, begins to show itself in the corners of her room at night, haunting her dreams as the memories of that horrifying experience define her lonely nights. It's a really haunting sequence with some of that Flanagan-esque ghost imagery that helps in making his ghost stories so compelling. Jessie saw the Moonlight Man as death itself, a constant, haunting reminder of the consumptive entity that was coming to claim her if she was not able to break free from those cuffs, and a reminder that she would die having never faced what happened to her. She would die cuffed and bound in every sense, with death claiming her as one of its treasures. Then we get the fucking genius idea of having the twist that the Moonlight Man was in fact not death, not a ghost, not a specter, not moonlight at all. What Jessie called the Moonlight Man was actually a deranged serial killer and grave robber with a severe birth defect who found her out in the woods all on her own. What I love so much about the sequence where she goes to his court trial to face him head on is the way that it deals with how people can create these monsters from things that happen to them and view trauma as some cosmic bestial force that will forever haunt their nights. But when she approaches him and breaks free from the cuffs, sees him in the fluorescent lighting, repeating back the thing that she had once said to him when she left.
You're only made of moonlight.
All she has to say in response is this.
You're so much smaller than I remember.
She sees at the end of it all that the spectral monster she created is nothing close to what she made it out to be. The thing that wound up embodying her fear and trauma was so much smaller than she remembered, now that she's faced all this head on, in the light. The eclipse, the Moonlight Man, these things continued to haunt her after her escape. But now she can walk right up to it and discredit everything it holds over her, and as she leaves the courthouse, we see the eclipse finally end, and the sun is unveiled. Gerald's Game is a truly brilliant story about trauma, and it's one that seems extremely difficult to properly adapt because of how much of the story happens inside of the protagonist's head. Not only that, but it deals with some really tough subject matter, and Flanagan tackled all of this pretty much perfectly. It's a disturbing, haunting, and sickening watch that rewards you for sticking it through by feeling that immensely powerful epilogue. It has so much to say about trauma and abuse and fear and what happens when you finally face those things. It doesn't hold back, even slightly, and it shouldn't. Trauma also doesn't hold back, and I appreciate that they were willing to go all in on portraying that in such a raw and honest way. Now, Netflix, get your head out of your ass and put this on Blu-ray. And Midnight Mass while you're at it. We had to wait 8 years for Hush, and that only happened because your rights expired, and it sold extremely well, and everyone was happy, so please, for God's sake, just do it. Mike Flanagan is one of those filmmakers that really just understands how horror can be so much more than scares. He's without a doubt my favorite Stephen King adapter, and Gerald's game shows why that is. Also, yes, I'm sorry for covering another Flanagan project and having it not be Hill House. I'm working on it. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.